No matter what you do, your metal vocals just aren't sounding good enough in your mix. This is a super common problem for people who are learning the art of production. Nailing metal vocals is one of the hardest things to get right because metal vocals occupy basically the same frequency spectrum as all the other instruments that matter in a metal song, like guitars, bass, synth pads, and so on. The way to fix this is not with a new microphone. There's no miracle plugin that's going to do it. It's by applying a framework and repeatable steps that you can use across every single mix to ensure that you're getting a professional sounding outcome. So that's what we're going to cover today. We're going to go step by step through my process for mixing metal vocals to get a professional quality sound. Vocals are usually one of the first things that your listeners are going to be listening for. So let's make sure that they sound absolutely amazing, regardless of where you're starting from today. First thing I'm going to focus on, which is often overlooked, is how to record excellent takes with a singer. There's a couple things that a lot of folks will get wrong, and we're going to fix those before we even get into mixing. Number one, no cupping the microphone. A lot of metal vocals like to do this. They're probably used to doing that on stage. It's going to hurt the quality of the take and make it harder to work with later on. Number two, you want to get them standing in one place so that they're getting roughly a consistent distance between their mouth and their voice and the microphone. Sometimes I'll even put an X on the floor and tape and get the singer to stand on that X so that we're getting consistency. Because remember, this is somebody that spends most of their time on stage, running around like crazy, and very little of their time in the studio. They might need some coaching and guidance to get a really high quality take. Number three, we need to make sure the singer is projecting. A really easy hack for that is to have the singer visualize that what they're doing is they're nailing the words leaving their mouth against a wall across the room. This is going to encourage projection, and it's going to get you higher quality takes to work with. Number four, I want to make sure that I'm helping the singer find their authentic voice. If they don't sing like Will Ramos, then no amount of mixing is going to make them sound like that. The good news is they shouldn't sound like that. They should sound like themselves. You can help the singer do this by making them feel really, really comfortable in the studio, making sure they don't feel rushed, making sure you're taking breaks, and let that real authentic voice shine through. The last thing that I'll say is I like to get a ton of takes. I spend a ton of time on vocal takes, way more than I spend on the other instruments. And I like to have 5 different tracks of vocal takes so that I can play with them in various ways that I'll show you next. So that's how I like to approach recording. Let's use that to jump into a project, and I'll show you what you can do when you have that many tracks and that many takes of vocals. So here we are in a project. This is for Drop Stages. It's a black metal song. You can see here that I've already kind of highlighted my vocal tracks, and I've done a full song's worth of takes. It's edited now, but this started as a full song's worth of takes across a couple different vocal styles. So in this case, where the singer is doing a very high-pitched sing, a high-pitched scream, and then also kind of a low chest growl, if the main vocal style is that high-pitched scream, I like to get at least 3 tracks that are capturing that. And the reason for this is because one very easy way to bring density to the vocals in a mix is to layer them, to have a lot of them on top of each other where the vocalist is doing essentially the same thing. So in all my songs, I usually am going to have a minimum, absolute minimum of 2, but often 3 of the exact same vocal performance on 3 different takes playing at all times. And I'll show you why. So here you can see what I'm doing with these takes. So these top 3 are kind of the high-pitched these bottom 2 are the low pitch, oh, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my best take and I'm going to run that one right down the middle, and that's my lead vocal track. Then I have the exact same words sung in roughly the same style on these other 2 takes for backup vocal left and backup vocal right. And I'm going to pan those just slightly to the left and right. There's no other processing on this. And I want to show you very quickly what layering alone can do for thickening up the vocals in your mix. So here's the lead vocal track, unprocessed by itself. It's going to sound kind of thin, right? One came and licked my hand. Now watch, we're not adding any plugins. We're not EQing, no compression, nothing else. All we're doing is layering. I'm going to bring in these other 2 vocal takes by panning them slightly left and right in the field. We're getting density and width across the mix. And I think you'll see that already this is going to sound better. One came and licked my hand. That's already starting to sound a lot more like what I want, and I haven't done any processing yet. So now let me show you what it sounds like with those other 2 tracks brought in. And what I like to do once I have the 5 is I'll kind of bring them in and out for emphasis at key points in the song. So Here's one of those moments where I'm going to have all 5 tracks going, and these are panned wider to create even more of that kind of surround sound effect here. All hail the husk of man! See, to my ears, that's already kind of close to what we want. We're obviously going to do a lot more work here, but that's why it's good to get all those takes so that you can really start to experiment with them in the project. Next, we're going to shift our focus into track level processing. So we're going to start by how we process these tracks individually, and later we'll work on how we bust them together and ultimately integrate them into the mix. So starting with my lead vocal track first, which is where I always like to start, I'm going to just apply some EQ here. And when you're doing EQ moves, a mistake that I made early on, I watched a lot of YouTube videos and there were folks who said, here's the trick to how you set up your EQ, the 3 EQ moves that are going to give you professional sounding metal vocals. What I've learned is that every voice is different. And if every voice is different, the EQ should be different too. Early on, I was making those 3 magic EQ moves and my voice just sounded horrible. And the reason for that is because my voice was different from the voice that was being recorded in that tutorial. So what we're going to focus on with EQ is we're going to focus on bringing out the singer's real voice and cutting away the things that are getting in the way of it, right? So I like to use FabFilter Q3 for this. I'm going to hit play and we're just going to look and see where the frequencies are active here. 1K man licked my hand. I'm going to pause right there. A common piece of guidance that you'll see on YouTube tutorials is to cut out this little bit right here and say, you know, this is where the low mids are bad, so let's get rid of 350. In this case, that is actually not the right move. And you can see why visually if you look at it, right? I'm going to boost this back up. And what you'll see is that this vocal is already scooped in that region. This is a higher pitched voice. If I were to dip that first, what I'd be doing is cutting even more of the meat out of the singer's voice, right? Here's what that would do. 1K man licked my hand. I cut some flesh. See, to me, that's getting thin in a way that I don't like. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to start with a couple basic sweeps to find the areas that feel boxy, nasally, the sounds that I don't want, so that I can cut those away and get to just the sounds that I do want. And the way that I do that is by boosting and sweeping around until I hear resonances that I don't like and cutting them out. So I'll show you how I'm going to do that here. 1K man licked my hand. I cut some flesh. And fed her to her. So you could hear this area. I'm going to boost it again. It sounds like we're inside a cardboard box, right? I don't want that, and I'm going to cut it. I'll show you what it sounds like boosted one more time. 1K man licked my hand. And throwing a dip in there is already going to make a world of difference. I'm also going to throw a high pass in here, and I generally like to not hug the frequency curve. I'll put it, 20 hertz or whatever below. 1K man licked my hand. Okay, I'm hearing a little harshness over here, so let's sweep and find that and maybe dip that a little bit. 1K man licked my hand. I cut some flesh. Okay, every once in a while I like to boost where I feel like the singer is really at their strongest, because by boosting that I can eclipse some of the weaker frequencies. And I'm seeing that that's happening right around here in the 1000 to 1200 hertz range. If I was following the guidance to always boost 1800 hertz, I would be missing this frequency range completely and boosting an area that sounds really harsh. This is why it's so important to do this uniquely on every vocal track that you mix. So I found 2 things I don't like. Now let's boost something that I do like and start to bring out the natural tendency in this singer's voice. 1K man licked my hand. Right about there feels good to me. Let's just do a quick A/B on those moves that we've made globally and see if we sound better or worse. 1K man licked my hand. I cut some flesh. To me, that sounds a bit clearer. We're getting a little more of kind of the natural talent out of that vocal. I'm noticing that there's some harsh sibilants happening up here in the 6,000 to maybe 10,000 hertz range. That's going to be common, but you don't want to blindly cut. You want to sweep until you find it. And what I'll usually do is a dynamic dip here. 1K man. You can hear that k, that k is really, really aggressive, right? That's what I want to be focused on now.
One came and licked my hand. I cut some flesh and fed her. One came and licked.
So by throwing a dynamic cut there, I'm not going to touch that frequency range at all until that k or that p sound comes in. So that's the value of using a dynamic dip for the sibilants. You could go crazy chopping up a vocal track with EQ. I really don't like to. I like to make 2 or 3 focused moves and just move on, because we've gotten the really big stuff taken care of. And this is going to be layered with a bunch of other vocals in a very busy mix. Any of those micro moves are likely to get lost, but you run a big risk of cutting too much and hurting the integrity of the voice. So I'm going to just call this done. Next, we're going to throw in some compression. I like to do 2-stage compression, where I lead with one heavy-hitting compressor with a super fast attack. That's going to do most of the kind of dynamic leveling that I'm looking for. And then I'll follow up with something more gentle to add color. A mistake that I made early on is I love analog sound, and I would always reach for a compressor that was giving the voice a bunch of color, because I would start to hear that grit that I wanted in the vocals. In my opinion, that's a mistake for the first compressor that you throw in the voice. So lately, I've been using the distressor. You can also use an 1176. They're, Pro C 2, I think it is, by Fab Filters, another one. Look for a compressor with a super fast attack, because we're going to have the attack coming in really hot out of the gate on this compressor to create level consistency in the voice. So let me throw a compressor on here. I'm usually going to start with a 4-to-1 ratio. Some producers like to do 6-to-1, 10-to-1, really high ratios for metal vocals. I find that kind of squeezes the life out of it. So I'm going to start with a 4-to-1 ratio. I'm going to have my attack right at 0, which means the fastest possible attack. And I'm going to put my release somewhere in the middle. So what the compressor is going to do is it's going to catch those vocals right when they're leaving the mouth, and it's going to create consistency in the level. So you don't have a huge burst of volume at the front of a phrase that then peters out over the course of the rest of it. So I'm going to turn this on. On distressor, you have options to add a little harmonic color here. So there's a distortion 2 option and a distortion 3 option. I like to do this later with a separate plugin, but it's good to know that they're there. And I'm going to have my high pass detector engaged. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn it on, and I'm going to turn the input knob up until I'm seeing somewhere between 5 and 7 decibels of gain reduction, which is what this meter with the numbers here across the top is going to do.
One came and licked my hand. I cut some flesh and fed her.
Okay, so I like what it's doing right about there. It's not changing the tone a lot. It's just creating a little bit more leveled intensity in the vocals. So let's just do a quick A/B.
One came and licked my hand. I cut some flesh and fed her to her.
So what you can hear there is the distressor is keeping that volume, that dynamic range in check, so that we have consistency over the course of the song. So that first compressor for me is not changing the sound all that much. It's not really coloring the tone. It's just catching those big peaks and leveling them off. The second compressor is where I'm going to focus on, some of that analog sounding finesse. A very common, second stage compressor that almost everyone uses in the industry is going to be the LA2A. You're hearing the same 2-stage vocal compression that you would hear in, top 40 pop, right? This is a very common practice that I think works great in metal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw a second compressor on here. There's a Waves plugin, there's a Universal Audio plugin. They're all pretty good. And what I'm going to do here is I'm only going to take 2 decibels of gain out. So this has the meter in the middle here. I'm going to try and dial this peak reduction knob until I'm seeing right around 2 decibels of gain reduction on the voice.
One came and licked my hand. I cut some flesh and fed her to her. They ate deep of her hand. Then they changed and were. One came and licked my hand. I cut some flesh.
somewhere right about there. So you can hear this one actually is adding some tonal color here. So let's just A/B that.
One came and licked my hand. I cut some flesh and fed her to her.
I love the way that sounds. So now I have my EQ, 2 stages of compression. The last thing that I'm going to do at the track level usually is apply some saturation. So 2 plugins that I'll usually grab for this are Decapitator and Black Box. For today, let's just grab Decapitator because I'm in the mood for that. And the key with Decapitator and with saturation in general is a little bit goes a really long way. In my opinion, you don't want to just absolutely destroy the voice with saturation here. You want to be a little more nuanced. And the reason for that is I don't want to destroy the things that make the voice sound like the voice usually. I just want it to sound a little more aggressive. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to pick the E setting, which I tend to really like. Tone right down the middle, I tend to like, which is also true of Black Box. I like to keep the tone focused on the mid-range. I'm going to keep the mix dial pretty low. I'll start the drive at, maybe 1, dial up the mix a little bit, dial up the drive a little bit, get the needle jumping a little bit until I hear that level of aggression that I want.
One came and licked my hand. I cut some flesh.
I'm happy with it right about there. I hear a little bit of intensity coming in, but it doesn't sound like the voice is straight up distorted, right? Will it be that so I can show you what I mean?
One came and licked my hand. I cut some flesh and fed her to her.
You can really hear that grit on those extended syllables at the end of the phrase. So that's what I like to do at the track level. Let's just grab one of the backup vocal tracks so I can show you how I would approach the backup vocal differently, and then we're going to move on to bus level processing. So I'm just going to light up the plugins that I already have here, and let's start with this backup vocal track. So generally, the way that I like to think about backup vocals is I want them to really be strengthening the punch on that lead vocal, which means that I don't necessarily need the very high information or the very low information in the frequency spectrum. So I'm going to pull up a Pro Q3 here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the high pass higher and the low pass lower than I had them on my lead vocal track. And then I'm also going to carve out some space somewhere in the upper mids to let the clarity on the lead vocal shine without stepping on it with the backup vocal. So I'm just going to run those EQ moves here really quick and show you what I mean.
One came and licked my hand. I cut some flesh and fed her to her.
So I like to have the backup vocals for screaming like this a bit darker. Let's say be that so you can see what I mean. By bringing the low pass down here, it's going to darken this vocal and push it into the background, which is where I want those backup vocals to sit.
One came and licked my hand. I cut some flesh.
I might go down to 5,000 sometimes. This is why I can't stress enough that there are no rules with this stuff. Any magic rule for a magic set of frequencies, I think, is advice that is not going to work on a lot of different tracks because you have different voices every time. This is especially true of voices, by the way, that, maybe it always sounds great to boost 200 on a snare drum. I could buy that, but voices are just so dynamic and so different. So you want to treat each one as a snowflake a little bit. So I'm going to make a couple moves here. I'm just going to dip the low mids a little bit to keep the mud out. And I'm going to make a dip somewhere in the upper high mids to make sure that I'm not clouding that lead vocal. So I like to have both of them playing for this. It's easier to hear how they fit together.
One came and licked my hand. I cut some flesh and fed her to her.
Okay, that's working for me. And I don't go too crazy with track processing on the backups. All I have added after EQ here is just some more compression. I'm not going to do the 2-stage thing. I don't think that it's worth being so precious with the backups. Plus, if you add too much color on all the backups too, the saturation really stacks up and you wind up with something kind of muddy and messy. What I will do, however, is really smash those backup vocals. So on the backup vocals, rather than a 4-to-1, I'll go all the way up to 10-to-1, sometimes 20, sometimes nuke, depending on what I'm doing. I'm going to have the attack and release roughly the same. And I'm going to push this input further and maybe get to 10 or 12 decibels of gain reduction on the backing vocals. The reason for that is they're going to be lower in the mix in terms of volume. And I really just want to pin them right there so that they kind of feel like a solid block of backing while all the drama and the range is happening on the lead. So let's just dial this input knob up and monitor the gain reduction. Again, we're looking for probably 10 to 12. You could go up to 20 though, whatever. Just do what sounds good.
One came and licked my hand. I cut some flesh and fed her.
Okay, that's working for me. I will very often, once I find the left side processing that I like, I'll just copy the entire thing right over to the right side. Some people say that you shouldn't do that. I don't really get why. So that's just what I'm going to do. And then, just to round us off, I'm going to just engage these last two. I did basically the same thing on these tracks. You can see we have a higher high pass, a lower low pass, some dipping happening. And let's just see what all of my tracks sound like together with all the track level processing. We're not doing wet effects yet. Reverb, delay, shimmer, that stuff. We're going to get to that later. I don't like to have those effects engaged while I'm still figuring out the bus and still figuring out what it's all going to sound like in the mix, because I think with those effects, sometimes you add them when you don't really need them. It's better to see what this sounds like as a song and then fix any problems that you hear than just proactively throw a bunch of plugins out there, right? So here's what all 5 tracks sound like together now with the track level processing engaged.
All hail the husk of man, take and eat, return to sand.
All right, sounds pretty good to me. And this is where I used to make a ton of mistakes when I was first learning production, because to me, on their own, those vocals sound fantastic. The problem is when you turn the rest of the song on, they might not. They might poke out, they might be too quiet. And that was how time and again, I kept winding up with mixes where the vocals just didn't sound right. So let's see how we're sounding at this stage. I'm going to turn the rest of the song on. So right off the bat, to me, the vocals are sitting on top of the mix. They're way too forward. That's not appropriate for this genre of music. They're not glued in, right? They're poking out, and they might sound good, but they're poking out so much that I'm kind of distracted from the rest of the song. That's where the mix bus, or sorry, the vocal bus processing is going to come into play. So you can see I have all 5 of these tracks bus to one vocal bus, and then I have that vocal bus to an a cappella bus. The reason I'm doing this in this particular case is just because I also have gang vocals that come in later in the song, and I wanted to process those a little bit differently. Pretend that I don't have that though, just to keep it simple. One bus is fine, but the idea is that you want to combine these tracks and route them to one channel so that you can process that channel and apply the same processing to all of the individual tracks at once. So I'll show you how I'm doing that here. Generally, whether it's 1 bus, 2 bus, doesn't matter. I'm going to apply kind of the same rule of thumb. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to EQ the entire bus. And this is where I'm going to just be doing some general cleanup, do all of my vocals cover one particular part of the guitar, one particular part of the bass. That's going to be really difficult in my mix once I bounce this out. So I'm going to solve that problem right now. And I'm going to do that with some EQ. So let's engage the whole song again, and we're going to start playing with EQ here.
All hail the husk of man.
So I'm going to throw a high pass in there just to clean up that rumble that you can see happening at the left. We just don't need any of that. And I can see now that I am getting some mud buildup here in the 350 hertz range. Now that all of these vocals are stacked together, that's something that I'm going to want to take out so that I don't have a really muddy low mid region, which is something that you hear quite often in an amateur mix. I'm hearing some harshness over here and, the 6,000 or, maybe 3 to 6,000 hertz range. So I'm going to do the same thing on the bus now that I did on the tracks. I'm going to boost the frequencies that I think might be bad, and then I'm going to cut them out. So you can see that already leveled this thing down a little bit, cutting out that extra noise. So now they're a little quiet. I'm going to boost the level a little bit to bring them back. Okay, I'm hearing some sibilance over here. Same thing as before. We'll use a dynamic cut for that. That's starting to sound pretty good to me. Another rule that I've seen people say, hey, you should do this every time, is to throw a high shelf at the high end frequencies of a vocal bus. Basically something that looks kind of like this, where you boost it pretty aggressively in the high regions to give it some screech and some howl. This is another case where I really don't think that universal rules apply to anything, because this is going to be fairly dark with a low pass up here. And I actually think that fits the song quite well. And I also know from experience, if I were to boost those high frequencies, they'd cover up those tremolo guitars, they'd cover up those rhythm guitars, and they'd make it harder to hear the music that I want the listener to really hear here. So I'm going to play around with this low pass until I find where I want to put it. I think I like it right there. It's still keeping enough space in there for the rhythm guitars and the tremolos. So that's good for EQ. Another amazing plugin, I said there are no magic plugins. This actually kind of is a magic plugin, is Soothe 2. And, I was boosting, dipping. There's resonant frequencies in there that I might not want. If you do that manually, it's easy to accidentally cut the heart out of the bus. But Soothe 2 does it somehow algorithmically, and whatever it does, it just works. So I'm going to just pick a setting here. Let's try harsh vocal start. And I'm going to dial this up until I hear what I'm looking for here. I'm dialing this up, in essence, cuts the offending frequencies that Soothe 2 has determined I don't want in this vocal bus. So I'm going to just put a little bit on here because some harshness is good in metal. That feels pretty good to me. And then the last thing that I'm going to do on this vocal bus, we are going to apply bus compression. I'm going to do it globally across all my vocal tracks from this acapella bus, but I love some bus saturation too. So the decapitator track level saturation, that's really kind of a harsh, like ice picky kind of saturation. I want more saturation because saturation is going to help me glue this in with the rest of the music and prevent that vocal sitting on top of the song effect that we heard earlier. But I want to find saturation that complements that harsh upper mid ice pick decapitator sound. And my go-to that I use 100% of the time somewhere in my mix is tape emulation. I love that gooey analog distortion sound that you get from tape. And there's a couple plugins that are doing a good job of emulating that. Soft Tube Tape is one that I use quite often, and Virtual Tape Machines by Slate Digital is the other. So I'm going to throw this saturation plugin on here, and I'm just going to dial this up until I hear the right level of glue. So listen very carefully, and what you should hear is that vocals that are poking out a little bit are just going to kind of settle neatly into the mix a little bit more as I turn this knob. Tape is really subtle, but that's kind of what I like about it. See, we're using a lot of plugins. We're mixing this in the box. And if every plugin did something really bold, they would stack up until you had kind of an unrecognizable mess at the end. So what I really like is plugins like this one, where you're getting 1 or 2% more of what you're looking for. And when you stack those up, you can really start to create a signature sound for yourself as a producer. So that's what I like from the Tape Machines plugin there. And finally, I'm always going to apply bus level compression to a vocal bus. And my go-to for that is the API 2500. So let's turn this off. I'm going to bring the threshold all the way down. I like to be very gentle with this. This is a me thing. You'll see other creators on YouTube who are big fans of kind of smashing the vocal bus, just like they're fans of smashing the vocal track. I don't like that. I don't want that super clinical, modern deathcore sound where, frankly, I feel like every song sounds exactly the same and like the same producer did all of them. No shade, but that's what it sounds like to me. I want these tracks to breathe a little bit and to sound like me as a producer putting my fingerprints on it, right? So what that means is, rather than using a 4-to-1 ratio, I'm going to use a 2-to-1 ratio, maybe even a 1.5-to-1 ratio. And that means that I'm going to be a lot gentler with how I bend the peaks of the signal with the compressor. I'm also going to go all the way as long as possible on the attack. So this compressor is going to take a long time to kick in. And for the release, I'm either going to do the fastest possible release or, maybe the second fastest. In terms of tone, again, I'm looking for something that's not going to aggressively compress this bus. I don't totally understand what all these different tone settings do in 2500, but I do know that I have a lot more kind of analog ooey gooey color happening when I have this on the old setting, whereas the new setting is going to clamp down on the compressor a little bit. The same is true of the thrust detector. Normal seems to be the gentlest, and obviously the knee, we want to be as soft as possible for the same reason. So let's just start here and let's dial this threshold up. And I'm really only looking for 1, maybe 2 decibels of gain reduction. At this point, I'm not really trying to compress these vocals. I'm just trying to process them just enough to glue them in. I don't want to push them down. I just want to gently slide them into the mix. So I'm going to engage this compressor and I'm going to hit play on the rest of the song. And I'm just going to very slowly dial this threshold until I'm hearing that glue sound that I'm looking for. That's right about where it is for me on this song. So 2 decibels of gain reduction. Again, this is why hard and fast rules don't work. This is a little different from how it would normally shake out, but this is what this song needs. So now we've done, good recording takes. We've set up our tracks and panned them appropriately. We've done track level processing on the vocals. We've done bus level processing on the vocals. Only now am I going to get into my wet effects, meaning my reverb, my delay, all that kind of stuff. I really like to leave that for the end because, as you can hear, this is already starting to fit pretty nicely. If I had covered this thing with reverb plugins, it might sound crazy right now and I wouldn't know exactly why. So general rule of thumb, I like to have one somewhat short verb. So I love the Valhalla plugins, Valhalla Vintage Verb. I use this honestly for basically all the reverb that I ever do. I like to, on the lead vocal in particular, but really across all of them, bring the EQ high cut down so that we're not returning a ton of really high frequency reverb that could muddy those tremolo guitars and muddy those lead guitars. And I'm going to cut out the low end, up to 190, 200, something like that, so that we're not returning a bunch of echoey mud on the return either. So that's generally how I'm going to dial that shorter reverb. Then I'll usually have a longer reverb too. These are 2 separate auxiliary sends. You'll notice that I'm doing these as sends, meaning I'm sending this signal out to a channel that has this processing, but I'm also still hearing a signal for these lead vocals that has no reverb, right? So the main lead vocals channel is not getting any reverb. We're sending that signal out to an external channel, which is, and that gives me the ability to kind of dial the reverb up and down to taste without really muddying the clarity of that main lead vocal track. And that means I can be a little more aggressive, right? I can have a reverb with, a 5-second decay, and I can just dial it to taste, right? So let's just play with these reverb knobs a little bit I'll start with them disengaged, and then we'll bring them in and dial them. Now we got a black metal track. That wet effect is often the difference between metalcore, hardcore, and black metal. You can see it really push the vocals kind of into the ether, which is where I want them on this black metal track. So I'll have, one short decay reverb here, and then I'll have one longer decay reverb here. And then I will also at a minimum have some delay. I always use quarter note. Eighth note sounds good sometimes, but I really like that kind of like echoing in a cavern sound. And quarter note I find does a better job of that. And then I'm just going to dial this in to taste a little bit. I like it right about there. And I didn't do it in this project, but sometimes I will also add a slapback. Let's just do it for fun. And I will throw the slapback right in the chain. And what I like about the slapback is it just, if you dial it correctly, here, I'll show you here. I'll just grab a preset slapback from Echo Boy. This is another really good delay plugin by Sound Toys. So I have some tape delay here now. And I really want this to be subtle enough that I don't really hear the slapback happening. I just hear some thickness in the consonant. So I'm going to start with the mix high, and then I'm going to dial it down until just after I stop hearing the slapback, obviously. I'll show you what I mean. Let's solo this. You can hear when I put it right there that I can't really hear the slapback. It just sounds a little bit thicker. That's sometimes nice trick to throw in. So let's hear how this lead vocal track is sounding in the mix. I'm pretty happy with that. So just to round things out, I'll usually apply some mix of the same wet effects, often the exact same channel to the backing vocals. So you can see here, on the backing vocal, I'm not using delay here. I am using both of those reverbs, and I'm sending this to the exact same channel. So the reason I'm using the same channels here instead of spinning up new ones is by applying that processing to multiple tracks from that same channel, I'm further gluing these vocals together. I'm making it sound, in other words, more like these vocals are all happening in the same recording room, right? So when that may not be the case when you're mixing, right? You might be getting, home recorded vocal tracks from a couple different places that then need to come together. This is an easy trick while you're mixing in the box of really gluing them all together. So that's all the processing that I like to apply for metal vocals in my mixes. And what you should hear now as the finished result is you should hear weight behind the vocals. You should hear the intensity and the aggression, but not masking the guitars, not masking the bass, not masking the drums. The last thing I'm going to do is just tinker with the overall level until I feel it sitting in the mix exactly how I want. Sounds pretty good to me. So hopefully that helped you out. That's my framework for approaching vocal processing. If you're interested in seeing how I process other things, there's a video that I'll link in the description where I do an entire song across all the instruments from scratch. If you're interested in hearing the finished product of this song, this is a song called Husk by Drop Stages. I'll throw their Spotify in the description as well. This song is getting released in a couple weeks. So if you're watching this video a couple weeks after I made it, you can go and check it out to hear what the finished product is. And finally, if you got value out of this, please please follow and subscribe. We are trying to reach a larger audience with this channel, and we're in the process of building out our new studio space here in Brooklyn. So until then, I'm going to continue to film content like this to help you level up your production. So thanks a bunch, guys. See ya.